So why should we split user stories and how do we go about splitting them? Hi, my name is Chris. I'm a seasoned Scrum Master. Welcome to my channel Everything Agile, where I try to share a little bit of my Agile knowledge with all practicing Scrum Masters out there and even potential Scrum Masters so that you can be as successful as you can be with your teams and with your organization as a whole. So in this video, we're going to be talking about user story slicing or splitting. So why should we split user stories in the first place? If you recall in my previous video, one of the key characteristics of a good user story following the INVEST criteria, INVEST, is small. So the small part of it is that a good user story should be small enough to be completed within a sprint. And most preferably, the smaller, the better. Completed within like a day, and that's what I always try to get my teams to size user stories to be completed within a day or a maximum of 3 days. So user story should be like 1 story point or maybe a 3 story pointer maximum. If it starts getting to 5 story points and 8 story points, then we should be having conversations on how we can split them. So why do we want to have user stories or requirements in those bite sizes? Number one, so that it's less complex. The smaller it is, the less complex it is, so it can be finished up real quick and released. And if it's also very small, then there's a higher probability that that user story is going to be finished up and we're going to have feedback on it from the stakeholders during the sprint demo, for example. And then if there are any changes to be made, we can always adapt that change in the next sprint. So the smaller the user story, the better. So how do we go about splitting user stories that are now looking like epics that could probably be completed within 2 sprints or more? How do we split them? So we can always leverage this technique known as SPIDER, where S stands for spike, P stands for paths, I stands for interface, D stands for data, and R stands for rules or business rules. So what's a spike? So a spike is just mostly a reset. Most of the time, the reason why we create spikes during our backlog refinement sessions, for example, is when there's a requirement that the PO brings up and the engineers are really struggling to make sense out of it. Maybe the design is not yet clearly defined, and there are probably several ideas around how they can go about actually implementing that user story. And probably they don't have enough information that are informed enough to actually flesh out that user story and get it ready so that it meets definition of ready. Then it now becomes very important to take that back in the product backlog and maybe create a research story or an investigation story to carry out further research so they can make sense out of that particular business requirement or user story. So that's how you create a spike. And if you are using Jira in your environment, and there's always an issue type known as spike. So you create a user story and you give it an issue type spike, such that research would now be done on that particular user story. What design route do we want to take on that particular user story, for example? Then once that question is answered and they are now very informed, the engineers are now very informed, they can now go around splitting the user story, creating the real user story, and if it's still too large, they can now leverage these other criteria, paths, interface, data, and rules to actually split the user story to be completed within a day or 2 or even 3 days max. So that is a spike. So it's just a reason. We have paths. So how do you split a user story using the idea of paths? So take for example, even using your smartphone to pay for products, on Amazon, for example, there might be an option for you to pay on Amazon using either PayPal or using either credit card, right? So if you are building an application on one user story can have a payment button or a payment drop down that you can select PayPal as the payment option. And then another independent user story can have the payment option, which you can select a credit card payment method or a debit card payment method. Same thing. So this is just how you can split a story following two paths. Either payment goes through PayPal or payment goes through credit card of interface. So take for example, so if the bank notices that most of its customers are Android users, for example, they can prioritize a user story to actually do a payment option based on iOS end users that are operating with Android smartphones. So one user story can cater for Android users, and another user story can cater for those with Apple smartphones. Then, for those that are using laptops, for example, one user story can cater for users that have Linux operating system, and another user story can actually cater for users that are using the Windows operating system. So that's how you can split a user story based on the interface. Then another divider you can use is based on the data. So last week I took my family to the National Aquarium in Baltimore, and before I went to the website of the National Aquarium to see what exciting activities we could do there. So I discovered that we could watch a video for sharks, and I could click the button and see what the experience is going to look like. I also noticed that there's a section where you can be able to touch aquatic live animals. I also saw a section where you could be able to see dolphins in real life actually being fed by the aquarium staff. So those are different sources of data that can actually be captured on the website. So if a user story, for example, if they're building a website for National Baltimore Aquarium, instead of including one button where you can click and have access to read up on the sharks experience, the dolphins experience, for example, the octopuses experience, then if they discover that most of their customers move towards sharks, then they can split that user story and actually create a button that you can customers can click on to read all about sharks only, and then they can create another button in their user story that when you access the website, when you click on that particular button, it can open up everything you need to know about dolphins. So that's how you can split a user story following data. Then business rules is another criteria you can use for splitting user stories. So this has to do mostly with compliance issues and some constraints that are either imposed by regulatory bodies, or it's just good business practice, right? So for example, when I was booking the ticket, I observed that there's a maximum number of tickets one user or one customer can book. So a user story can be written based on that particular business rule, and that only a maximum of 5 tickets can be bought by a single user, and that user story can be written to cater for that functionality. Then another user story can be written to cater for the to enter the age of the customer or the user before ordering the ticket. So the number of tickets you want to order. So that can be another user story, which is putting a constraint on the age limit of the customer, whoever can order tickets and put in their credit card information. So that can be a separate user story. So that's just an example of how you can use business rules to actually split a user story into multiple branches. Then remember, however you split the user story, it should actually contain the interface, the middle tier, and the database. Remember, I was talking about the data, the data of charts. It should have all these elements so that it is vertically split. You vertically split the user story, then horizontally split it to have just the user interface. Then if at the end of the sprint you take care of just the UI part of it, then you're not going to have a demoable feature at the end of the sprint, which can actually be used by the end user. So make sure that however you're working with engineers to split the user stories, it should cover all the ingredients of a complete functionality. We should have the user interface, the middle tier of the services, and it should also have the database. So in this video, you have learned about how you can go about splitting a user story to remain small, such that it can be completed within a few days, 1, 2, or 3 days. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel and turn on the notification bell. See you in the next one. Ciao.